Right, well, let's get started, everyone. Other people will be joining us for the next few minutes. Welcome from Santiago. Now, I have to be honest with you, I'm not sitting in the middle of the Plaza Obradoiro, but it is just up the road from my house, and it's a lovely day today. So, a few domestic arrangements just as we get started. You're all muted automatically as you come in to the room, but if you feel compelled to speak, just send me a message, unmute yourself, and I'll invite you to speak. The agenda is very simple. I will give an introduction to the session, and then I will introduce my old friend, the famous John Brierley. And we're here with John, and in the background is Pilgrim Sean, who's running the technical side of things. So if you get any questions at any point during this introduction or when John's speaking, please send these in the chat. I will answer the ones that I can in the chat, and at times I will repeat them for John Brierley to respond to, and we'll get a discussion going. The session is being recorded, and I will post it on the Camino de Santiago All Routes group on Facebook. So the session is being recorded, I've said that. Now, I want to give a brief introduction to the Camino Francés, and it will get our discussion going. There's no shortage of information about the Camino Francés. Just look at the thousands of books and videos on YouTube of pilgrims' experiences. In this very short introduction, I want to focus on starting points, what the terrain is like, and some of the main characteristics of the route. I always think that too much planning might mean less adventure, and I'd like to know what John Bradley thinks of that. First, a little background. Although the Camino Frances is one of many routes through Spain to Santiago, it is the most well-known, and it's often referred to simply as the Camino, but of course it's one of many routes. Although historically Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the French side of the Pyrenees was never considered the start of this route to Santiago, it has become so in modern times for many pilgrims. However, the majority of Spanish pilgrims start in Roncesvalles or Pamplona. They wouldn't travel to a foreign country to walk in Spain. Where you start is your own choice. There is no official starting point, nor is there an overall authority which oversees any of the Camino routes. Different sections of the routes are signposted and maintained by the various local authorities through which the route passes. Let's take a wee look at numbers, because I know some people are very interested in this. In the holy year 2022, 51% of the 277,000 pilgrims who registered at the Pilgrim Office in Santiago in order to get the Compostela did so having walked the Camino Frances from various starting points. Of that total of 277,000, 132,000 pilgrims started in Sarria, which is situated just over 100 kilometers from Santiago. The total of 277,000 last year in the Holy Year does not include the huge numbers of pilgrims who walk part of the route, hoping to return at a future date. Whilst there is no accurate way of counting these pilgrims, it is thought that perhaps as many as 10 to 15 times the number who finally arrive in Santiago have walked sections of the route during the year. Let's look at this year, 2023, so far. After every Holy Year since 1993, the numbers have gone back down, but not gone back down to what they were the previous year. To date, as of today, 36,500 pilgrims have registered in Santiago in 2023, compared to 28,000 in the same period last year. That's an increase of 30%. Now, in the Middle Ages, there were no transport systems as there are today. Sean will put up an image from the Metropolitan Museum, which shows pilgrims of the Middle Ages using all sorts of different modes of transport. Some are walking, some are on horseback, some are being pulled in luxury wagons. So this is very much your choice. The point is to get to Santiago as a pilgrimage. And another important question is where to start. Pilgrims traditionally set out from their own homes. Some still do that. In order to plan your journey to begin the Camino, you need to decide where to start. I think there should be another slide up there, Sean. There we are. Nowadays, people talk about Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the border of France and Spain as the start. This was never the customary starting point for medieval pilgrims, but it has become so in modern times, particularly for non-Spanish pilgrims. So to re-emphasize, there is no obligatory starting point. Where you start depends entirely on you and the time you have available. Also, you don't have to travel the Camino in one continuous pilgrimage. Many people make the journey in sections over time. Therefore, you can start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, 4 or 5 weeks walking, or Roncesvalles, or Pamplona, or Leon. Leon is 2 weeks walking, or much nearer Santiago in Ocebrairo or Sarria, which is 1 week. For example, if you start walking in Sarria, you will certainly notice an increase in the number of pilgrims. But to re-emphasize, the choice is yours. What's the terrain like? Geographically, the Camino Frances can be roughly divided into 5 sections. First, the route crosses the Pyrenees and then descends through woodlands to Pamplona. There we are at the top of the route Napoleon, looking over the Pyrenees. Secondly, varied and beautiful sections cross Western Navarra and La Rioja, the winemaking region. They are partly wooded, partly agricultural, with some hills to cross, often with vineyards, just like this, as far as the eye can see. Between Burgos and Astorga, the route is on the Meseta, the high plains of Castile, undulating arable fields at 800 or 900 meters above sea level. There is little shade and it's hot and dusty in the summer and cold and raw in the winter, but it's a glorious part of the Camino Frances. After Astorga, the Camino crosses the Montes de Leon and passes the highest point at the Cruz de Ferro, followed by the fertile plain of El Bierzo. The route then climbs up to Ocebrairo and enters the final section in Galicia, a verdant land in total contrast to the Meseta. The mild Atlantic climate is akin to Western Britain or Ireland, or I see Roland there, or Wales. So the 2 mountain ranges rise to 1,500 meters above and may be snowbound in winter months. And as you know, the route Napoleon closes in winter, but has opened recently. And these hills may be subject to bad weather at any time. Most of the Camino is on tracks that present little difficulty. While some of the mountain sections are steep, I can assure you there's no mountaineering involved. What are the main characteristics of the Camino Frances? It's well signposted. You won't get lost. And if you sprain your ankle, just sit down, because there certainly will be another pilgrim along in a few moments. As this next slide indicates, there's accommodation of all kinds. Albergues are so frequently located on the Camino Frances that some people walk and stop when they get tired. This really only works if using albergues, especially this year. If using hostels or hotels, it's best to book at least a few days in advance, if not more. As well as the magnificent scenery and architecture, there is also great fellowship with other pilgrims. You will make friends for life. And of course, at the end, a jubilant arrival in Santiago. Lastly, I want to tell you that I have prepared some guidance notes, which are free of charge, a free resource called Preparing for the Camino Frances. And it will help you plan your journey. It will talk about how long does it take, how much does it cost, what's the terrain like, language, physical preparation, gear. It's got packing lists, tells you about money, mobile phones, and so forth. And Sean will tell us how we get that. Again, this is a free booklet downloadable from the All Routes group, the Camino de Santiago All Routes group on Facebook. Now, I take great pleasure in introducing you to my friend and fellow pilgrim, John Brierley. John is the author of the best-selling Camino Guides and is one of the best-known names in the Camino world. I first met John in 2010. Gosh, 13 years ago, John. 7 years after his first guidebook was published. More have followed. John is a professional guidebook writer, and his books are of the highest quality, well prepared, well presented, with excellent maps, and he's assiduous about keeping them up to date. But John is also a pilgrim, and he thinks deeply about pilgrimage. He writes about the inner journey as well as our physical journey and the transformational possibilities which walking the Camino opens for all of us. Over to you, John.
Hello.
Hello, John.
Great. I get such a thrill out of these gatherings. It's just so lovely to see the Camino family just expand all around. It's a truly remarkable entity because it's so global and it's so reachable and it's so accessible to anybody of any religion and none, any color, any social situation. Everybody is welcome on the pilgrimage of the Camino. And that's what gives it, I think, its unique flavor and one of its transformational qualities, because we suddenly realize that we're not so different. We're really not so different. And when it comes down to having a purpose and an intention in life, we might even come to a point where we realize we all are ultimately headed in the same direction. At least that's my take on it. Now, I know this afternoon's been sort of headed with the Camino FRANCÉS, but one of the questions that was posed, I know, to Johnny Walker earlier, which I think would be a good sort of introduction into it, is the Camino de Santiago becoming too busy and too commercialized? That was one of the questions put. And it's interesting the form it was put in, because it was put in as the Camino de Santiago. And there are many Caminos, as we know. Johnny Walker referred to some of the stats there earlier, where we see still, although coming down dramatically, still over half of all pilgrims walking the Camino FRANCÉS. And that is about 700 or 800 kilometers in length. But it is recognized by the Camino associations and by the cathedral that there are over 78,000 kilometers of official historic waymark routes throughout Europe. That means that for those who feel that the route is becoming a little bit overcrowded, you have around 77,000 kilometers of routes with relatively few people on it. So, of course, we all have to feel comfortable with the, with the route that we're taking. And some of the more remote routes do require a different level of, physical strength, and the lack of support on some of them is noticeable. But it's good to remind ourselves of that. Now, there are many ways, apart from looking at alternative routes, to finding more space on the Camino. For a start, we're all, at least 99.9% of us, walking in the same direction. So it's very easy to, take a moment and let a sort of a large party of people pass by, and to find a sort of a quieter moment along the route and find your own pace, or, develop your own pace if you're, wanting to have a quieter or more reflective time. On my first Camino, I went into a period of silence. I felt I needed to. I got a calling to go into a period of silence, and I went into for 7 days. And the moment it happened, where it became clear I needed to walk in silence to listen to, if you like, an inner voice, I hung a postcard that had my backpack, had a pen, and I wrote in my best Spanish, this is now going over 25 years ago, I think it was something like, yo caminante en paz en silencio. Not a particularly good translation, but I felt it was fairly obvious to people that I didn't, I was in silence, and people were deeply respectful. And during that period of time, everybody, really, it was profound that nobody interfered with that. They were deeply respectful. So there's many ways we can find quieter ways to be quiet, even within the busyness that we find along the Camino Frances. And of course, there are also, I mean, I'm particularly interested and have been very keen and spent a lot of time in looking at alternative, what I call green routes, or show in my guidebooks as green routes. Many of them along rivers. Some are now waymarked, but often back then they weren't. And some of these are lovely, and they're not waymarked, some of them officially. But a river is a lovely way to both enter into and exit a city, because the river itself becomes the waymark. You just follow the river, for instance, and they're often shaded and beautiful and quiet. So there are many ways, even in the first few days, you can, do the little route up to Zabaldika with the wonderful nuns up there, with their little church, their beautiful little albergue also, and indeed going into Pamplona, which can be very busy, the river into Pamplona. So there are all those opportunities to find quiet and reflective space. We needn't be caught up in the busyness. And
well, John, may I interrupt you just for a moment, because you're speaking about, I realise this is a bit of a personal question, but I know you well enough to ask it, and nobody else is listening. Can you tell us, what age were you when you walked your first Camino, and you're still walking? Can you tell? I mean, I'm 70 and I'm still walking. What age are you, John Brierley?
Well, I was I think 49. I was going up to my 50th. And I'm now 75, just turned 75 last week. And so I've been, walking the Caminos for, a quarter of a century. And I've seen big changes in that time, because 25 years ago, the infrastructure was not well developed at that stage. I mean, a lot of the time I spent in sleeping in abandoned houses, up in the hills, but there's still these little villages with ruins, and you find one with a roof still extant, and hope that there wasn't a big wind in the night and the slates didn't come down on top of you. But that was sort of the way we traveled.
And John, Don Johnson is very grateful for this information. He's 84 and about to walk the Camino.
Where is he? Can we see him? Is he online?
Yes, he is. He's in the meeting. Have you any special advice for Don?
Well, yes. Looking at myself, 75, I mean, I've a little while to go to catch up with you. But some years ago, don't remember now, my memory's not so good, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID, I found myself walking with a delightful gentleman. This isn't to try and better you, but he turned out to be 94 years old. And I realized the way he came in every day, but very much following his own schedule. So he usually came in, before, he wasn't rushing for a bed at midday. He found his own pace. And I think that's really important. And I've had some health issues recently. And I've also now got to find a new pace. And I think that's a really important advice for everyone, for myself. I need to remind myself of this, because often I feel, I don't, and I either push myself too hard or don't push myself hard enough. But we need to find a pace that feels right for us. And that's what this other pilgrim of 94, John, did. He just found his pace. Now, what he did do, which was interesting, and I put that in contrast to a woman I met she was sitting on a wall with tears streaming down her, and I sat at a suitable distance apart and then sort of worked my way up the wall and said, can I, are you all right, sort of thing. And she was my age, 75, and her children had given her a present for her 75th birthday of a travel company that had organized all her accommodation. And her sadness was that she was tied to this, which if we're doing it that way, to this regimen. So she said she would come in sometimes, you know, full of energy and wanting to walk further, but she couldn't because the accommodation was there. Or she would find herself struggling to make the, you know, a place because it was too far ahead and her body was really struggling to make it. So what John did was John never booked in advance. He simply, you know, walked in with his gear until he felt this was the time to stop. And I asked him, and it was fairly near Santiago. I met him and he'd been walking from Saint-Jean. He said he'd never ever had a problem finding a bed. No, we had to be creative often, and we had to be creative 25 years ago. I mean, church porches, or churches were often closed, but you can't close a church porch which has got a roof. So I think flexibility, I suppose, is what I'm saying. You know, find your own. Let's each find our own pace that we're comfortable with, and stay flexible. And that flexibility might include, for instance, you know, having a problem, twisting an ankle or whatnot. We shouldn't necessarily get hung up on, you know, not using a facility like a bus. You know, if you're struggling, you know, you have to face the consequences of, well, you know, am I locked into just doing this on foot, or, you know, is this a sensible thing to break and to take this next section? My son walked it last year. I walked a bit with him, and he had really probably got a shin splint, a really bad one. And he had to, I said, well, look, you know, your option is to take a bus, get into the next town, so we'll meet up, and rest out, you know, until that foot heals, which he did. So stay flexible would be my what I would suggest. I don't know what anybody else in the forum here would say, but flexibility, find your own pace.
And John, a very interesting question has been raised by a friend of mine, Timothy, here in Santiago. And he says that, and this is true, and all throughout the centuries, people have made money out of the Camino. Guide writers, authors, musicians, filmmakers. Is it right to talk about the over-commercialization of the Camino, do you think, John?
I don't think so. No, I don't. You know, we live in a commercial reality. We're all, you know, part of an economic structure. I'll never forget talking to Maria Roncal. You probably know her, Johnny, and she runs the albergue there just outside Pamplona, Cesar Manure. And she closed one year because the family needed a rest. And I went to visit her during that year, and she said she was being plagued by people coming up and demanding rooms because she said, "Well, I'm closed. I'm not. I don't. We're taking time out." And she would say, she told me, she said, "Look, in the medieval period, there was always a commercial realization. People sent out, you know, people with nice bits of tasty grub to say, look, this is the grub we have coming down the road here. If you turn left and go up into the road on the right, we've got the best inn in town." Commercialization has always been a part of the Camino, in my understanding and her understanding. And true, in the medieval period, they were out there trying to sell their inns just as they're trying to sell today. We live in a commercial reality. That's just a fact. Now, there are, of course, I know you, Johnny, and many of us are, you know, really supportive of the idea of donativo, of, you know, places where, you know, there's no money set. But, you know, they do struggle. And what I've come up with in all the places, donativos that I've come up with, the average is around about €4.50 for a night and breakfast. And you can't really, even if it's a voluntary thing, it's really, you really struggle to keep the doors open. I'm not talking about just private places, but, you know, people, the associations reliant on a certain amount of income to, you know, keep the place and the roof tiles and repairs and so on and so forth. So commercialization is a reality. And if I've answered that question, I might just add a bit about on this commercialization aspect, about those wanting, a quieter route, or saying that the Camino de Santiago, the Camino Frances, is becoming over-commercialized. Commercialization is a fact of life, and if we can't walk through a city like Pamplona or wherever we are, or a town or a village, and deal with the rubbish on the side of the road, deal with the noise, deal with the, the petty theft or whatnot, we're not really living the Camino. The Camino is an education for life and for living in the commercialization, in the hectic pace, in the stress-filled. Admittedly, it gives us a bigger picture, and we're able to stand outside maybe of the stress and so on. But we need to be able to live and function properly, stress-free, gracefully, in a world that is a commercial reality.
And John, in your opinion, what do you think makes a walk along the Camino Frances or any Camino route, what makes it a pilgrimage? And can I just have a sub question there, because Estelle has sent a question to ask your opinion of carrying your backpack as opposed to having it transported from village to village. What do you think of that?
Well,
people who don't carry their rucksack are still pilgrims.
Yes, we can all be pilgrims, and we create our own Camino, and there are many ways to do it. I used to make a judgment many years ago. I hope I don't do now, although maybe I still carry some. I met a young girl once. She turned out to be Irish. I saw her ahead of me carrying a day pack, a very light day pack. And I came up behind her. She was walking very slowly. And as I came to her, obviously I was carrying some judgment, because she said to me, she said, the first thing she said, without saying one Camino or anything, they said, "I'm really sorry." She said, I have a medical condition. I was told I could never walk a Camino because I have a back, there's something wrong with my spine. And my doctor said, "No, you can't, you can't do it." And eventually she convinced him and said, "Look, if I get somebody to carry the backpack, and I do it in short stages, well, if you really follow this regimen, the answer is yes, you can do it." Now, since that day, I've never made a judgment. We just do not know the circumstances of each of us, either our time constraints, our medical condition, or our approach. And we can have a deep inner experience. We can have an insight into the nature of our life. We can of who we really are on a deep level. We can have a sense of self-discovery. It can come to us anywhere. We could be traveling in a taxi or a bus from A to B and suddenly get the insight we want. So I really don't make that judgment anymore, because I don't think that I can. Each of us has our own. We know individually.
Yes.
Are we walking this in, and are we walking it with a sense of sacredness, with a sense of the divine? Are we walking through the landscape or traveling through it on a bus if needs be? In a sense of traveling through the landscape temple. I just love that terminology. This sacred landscape that we walk through, including the cities and the buzz and the noise. So every aspect of life, every stage of the Camino can be an inner experience if we choose to make it so.
And I think, John, there are some practical considerations here. If you're sending your rucksack forward, then you can't just stop when you're tired and just book into any albergue. You've got to get to where the rucksack is. And some people find that restricting. But at the same time, once you've sent your rucksack forward once, you'll want to do it all the time, because It's quite different walking without a rucksack, but it's a different kind of Camino.
It is a different kind of Camino, but we each make that Camino ourselves. I mean, you definitely miss, if you're booking ahead and staying in hostels, if you're on your own, or even if you're as a couple, you definitely miss some of the camaraderie that you get in staying, in the albergues where you don't know where you're staying. There's all that sense of, well, I don't know where I'm going to stop. That wonderful sense of adventure and trust, because trust is also an aspect of the of pilgrimage. Trusting that there will be a bed at the end of the day, trusting that our needs will be met somehow.
And John, trusting the guidebook, and in the next 12 months, thousands and thousands and thousands of pilgrims will be walking along many Camino routes with your books in their hands. Could you take a few minutes and tell us how you do it? How do you actually make a guidebook?
Well, there's two things. I think the popularity of the Camino guides is down to two things. I got an absolute, not in a direction, was very, very clear. This had to be both a practical and a mystical journal for the modern day pilgrim. It was quite clear that's what these books were to be about. The practical side, I spent quite a bit of time working on it and coming to the realization that I would say 90%, possibly more, of all the people who walk the Caminos, well, specifically the Caminos FRANCÉS and the Caminos Portuguese, in other words, more popular routes, are not hikers per se. They are people who maybe don't really even understand the country code, which is why we get so much rubbish thrown around the place on the Caminos. But essentially, they're not able to easily take a map and flutter it around in the wind, and the north point and south point orientation makes no sense. So I developed a sense of maps that are rather like the TomTom. You walk down the page, and if there's an albergue or there's a cafe on the left-hand side, well, it's on the left-hand side. If it's on the right, it's on the right. If it's off-route, it's marked as off-route and how long it will be to get you to the off-route. So people find it very easy to walk with that mapping arrangement, and all the information has been placed there specifically by me, which is only pilgrim relevant. So you can buy the Michelin guide to the Camino, but it's full of petrol stations, and it sort of, again, if the vast majority of the information on it is not relevant to a pilgrim, or certainly not a walking pilgrim.
And John, how do you make sure your mileages are accurate? Often you're walking a stage of the Camino, and the guidebook says it's 23 kilometers, and it feels like 43 kilometers.
Now, so here, and I'm at pains to explain it in the guidebooks, which I think I do, and I have lots of lovely quotations from it. So 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, I originally mapped this out with a bicycle because we had no hand GPS systems then. And I have lovely stories about how I had to go back again and again and again. And so I developed the maps that way. And then when I got the GPS 10 years after that, I found absolutely there was not even 10 meters out in a day. The accuracy was phenomenal. Now, what happens? The only times I get people writing to me is saying, everything was great. However, coming into Burgos, the last 5K, you've got it wrong. It was at least 10. Now, at the end of the day, it's true. The time they took to cover that 5K was double, but the distance wasn't. The body tires at the end of the day, which is why I never give, times on the, because the time in the morning, you're covering 5K in an hour. In the evening, you halved it. So you have to look at measurements on the basis of what your body is doing, which is why I say that towards the end of the day, or towards later on in the morning, or when you really examine going on the next 5 or 10K, because that is going to be, hard work, much harder work than the first 10 or 15K.
John, one of the questions which people approaching their first Camino, and there will be a number of people in this meeting approaching their first Camino, one of the things people always ask is, will I get lost? And if I get lost, what do I do? Funnily enough, in my Camino bag over there, I've got 3 compasses. When I talked about doing the Camino, people gave me compasses in case I got lost, because they don't understand the yellow arrows.
So I'd say I've got 2 responses to that. The first one is that if you stay present, it's a wonderful word, that if you stay present to each passing moment, you will not and you cannot get lost. You will only get lost. You can only get lost if your mind wanders, and then your feet will wander too. You're stuck in a conversation talking about something or whatever or whatnot, and suddenly you're off the route. Now, so the first part, if you stay focused, you will never get lost. On the Camino FRANCÉS, you cannot get lost. And indeed, I would say almost the same on all the other routes I've walked, and I've walked many of them. They're so well waymarked that you'd really want to be making an effort to get lost. Now, if you get lost, that's part of your Camino. And I've met many people who come and say, I got lost in coming into whatever. And I said, well, tell me more. How was that experience? How did you resolve it? And then they said, well, this happened and that happened. I said, well, and then what was your overall experience of that day? But you know what? It was incredible. I suddenly found that out my own resources. I suddenly found somebody walking along who said, look, they're going to walk with me, local, and brought me somewhere. So I said, so being lost was actually a bonus. And they agreed. So you can't get lost to just stay focused. And if you get lost because you're not focused, well, stay alert, stay awake, and enjoy the ride. Enjoy the experience of being lost. It can be very powerful.
And then phone a taxi to take you back to the Camino. Maybe. John, could you take a few minutes and talk to us about what you mean by the inner journey?
Yes, and it's really very easy to do. I'll start a little bit back. So there is no vehicle that I know in the world where you can walk a route and go into a pub or a cafe and sit down beside a complete stranger and talk about the things that really matter. Talk about the existential questions. What the hell is this life all about? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Who am I underneath all this nonsense and this facade and that I built around myself of who I am? Although not only can you do it on the Camino, but I would suggest that as a pilgrim, we have a duty. That's why we're there, is to ask these questions and to prompt these questions. So the Inner Camino, the easiest way to say it, which never disturbs anybody, we are all aware of the inner weather. So it can be beautiful weather at the moment. The sun is shining outside then and everything is beautiful outside. But I could be raging inside because I'm angry, because of, whatever, this, that, and the other. So we all know we have an inner condition which can be completely separated out from the outer. So we know there is an inner and an outer experience that we have all the time, simultaneously. At every moment, we have an outer experience of what we're looking at or what we're smelling or seeing or hearing. And we also have an inner experience of how that feels. Does it feel right? Does it feel good? Does it feel bad? So part of the efficacy of the Camino to me is that we spend more time and more focus on developing and understanding that inner weather, that inner condition, and what it means to us, and how we can sow an intentionality. We all operate in this world mostly mindlessly, mostly unconsciously. So we're walking a pilgrimage, walking the Camino, away from the familiar situations we have, You know, we often, if we're walking on our own, we're walking without history. You know, we meet somebody, they don't know who we are or where we're from, and vice versa. So we can be very open with one another. You know, what are we to hide? There's nothing to disguise. So an openness comes, an open mind and an open heart. Now, when we walk with an open mind and an open heart, with a sense of kindness towards everybody that comes towards us, and that openness, then magic happens. And that's the inner Camino. And all the experiences that come to us along it are part of that. Now, I really have developed now a sense that my life is a Camino, and I mean that really very genuinely and very authentically. I'm on the Camino right now. I'm sitting here in my study, but I'm on the Camino. I'm on the inner Camino. I'm on a journey of discovery, of self-discovery. And once I've understood that, I can never not be on the Camino. The Camino is the way. I'm on the way. I'm on the way home. I'm on the way, whatever that means. So then we get lost in language, because of course then interpretations come. Well, what did he mean by home, and this, that, and the other? But we're all, you know, my hit is that we've all got the same destination, and it isn't Santiago. Santiago's on the way for many of us. But Santiago isn't our destination. We have another destination, a divine destination, back to the home that we left. But now we get into, you know, philosophical discussion and so on. But the inner Camino to me is part of this. So now we're talking about, you know, this is my hit. And if there's, however many people are on this online, if each person was given 5 minutes to say, well, what does the inner Camino mean to you? We get, if there's 300 people online, we get 300 different answers. Wonderful. Yes. But my hit is that what makes the Camino special, it's much, much more than a hike. It's a hike through the Spanish terrain, which can be very beautiful, but it's an inner hike. It's an inner journey of self-discovery.
John, thank you. You know, I was recently on a radio program, and they said to me, what's the one essential piece of kit that you put in your rucksack? And I wanted to say a bottle of whiskey. But I think for me, the most essential thing that people need, that I need still walking the Caminos, is an open mind. To keep my mind open to the possibilities, to meeting the wonderful local people, the food, just the friendships. And pilgrims share with each other, of course, often very profound personal experiences, and often just general chit-chat. But it's the other pilgrims that make it for me. What experiences like that have you had, John?
Oh, well, I would say to you that when specifically on the question of an open mind, I think several things. There's, you know, Nancy Frey, who lives in Santiago, the anthropologist, and yes, well known with her book. I think it is the Stories on and Off the Road or whatever. Now she has a lovely, wonderful website called Walking into Presence. And part of our research as an anthropologist is, you know, what impact has, for instance, the, you know, techniques of telephones and so on made, or what impact has it on the Camino? Now, the walking into presence requires to become present to each passing moment, requires us to sort of be there with an open mind. I think the two things are related. And I know that when I walk with an open mind, that is, I have no, you know, prejudice, I have no prejudgment of what's around the corner or where I will stay or what I will do. In the early days, every pilgrim I met 20 years ago was grateful for whatever came to them, whether the meal, there was a sense of gratitude, even the hovel of an albergue, or even the, you know, we had such a sense of gratitude. Now, a lot of the volunteers and the hospitaleros today say that's gone out the door. You know, pilgrims have become very demanding. You know, they have an expectation, so they've got a closed mind. This is the way it should be. You know, I'm a pilgrim and I should be treated with respect and given the best food and accommodation, etc., etc., etc. Generosity is also part of an open mind. A generous spirit, an open mind, an open heart. These are qualities that are I would say, essential for a pilgrim to develop. When we mightn't have them when we start. We mightn't have, you know, I was a very prejudiced, angry young man with life or whatever, or not when I started out. But the journey is one of getting rid of the dogma and the conditioning of our mind to stay open. You know, I think that you've touched on a very important aspect there. An open mind is a key ingredient of a pilgrim. A true pilgrim has an open mind.
So everyone, we're going into our last 10 minutes or so. If you've got questions that you want to put to the great man, now is the time to do that. Or as I said in the chat earlier, email me and I'll chat with John and we'll get you the answer to your questions. But now's the time. Feel able to just send your question to me and I will ask it if you'd rather do it that way, because there's a lot of people here. John, moving on, you know, on a Friday night when I was working, I'm retired now, on a Friday night, I used to sit with a drink, imagine that, and I would think about Camino experiences, and one or two things always came to my mind. A cold November day when I was freezing and starving, and I went into a bar, and obviously the woman was trying to close, and she was not welcoming. Let me just say, she wasn't welcoming. And I said to her, have you got any food? And she kind of said to me, of course we don't have any food. Anyway, I got a coffee. She gave me a coffee and I sat down. Well, she obviously felt sorry for me because she came over and she said to me, I'm making fish soup for the family. Can I give you a bowl? Now, fish soup is one of my favorite dishes. And down it went, and nothing has ever tasted so delicious. So when you're sitting there in that lovely room study that you're in, and you're reflecting on Camino memories, what comes into your head, John?
Well, I've had so many incredibly powerful experiences. I mean, one of the most dramatic, in a way, was where I hadn't followed my own advice. It's on page 62 or 74 or 105, which says, you know, if it's very hot, don't walk in the afternoon, wear a hat, and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I got a sort of a sunstroke and I collapsed on the side of the road. Luckily, hit a ditch full of briars and brambles, but it put me out of the direct heat of the sun. And I don't know how long I was unconscious for, but eventually climbed out, all bloodied, and all the blood at this stage had caked in myself. And I walked into a little bar, which was about, you know, the nearest place I came to about half an hour later. And as I walked in, very giddy and very whatever, a man came over and spoke. I hadn't spoken a word. And he just put his hands through the lip and said, sit, just sit. And he helped me over, sat me down in the chair, and then came back with a jug of water. Oh, don't say anything, don't say anything. And he came back about 2 minutes later with a jug of fresh orange juice. It ended up, he gave me a beautiful meal. He tidied me up and bloodied and sorted out my things. Before I left after lunch at about 2 in the afternoon, I told him I was going where I was going. He runs a restaurant at the bar. He drew a map of his house, the position of it, gave me the key of his house and said, your room is on the first floor, first on the right. The towns are opposite. I'll be here all night. I'll be late back. Won't be back till 1 or 2 in the morning. But in the morning, we'll have breakfast together. Wow, total stranger. I can't conceive of myself ever letting anybody giving them the keys of my house, a total stranger, especially one who looked like me. So the acts of kindness that I have experienced along the way are remarkable, truly remarkable. I just cannot imagine myself, even at this stage, ever showing that level of trust and kindness and to a total stranger. So my life, my Camino life has been full of those stories, rather like your fish soup. Mine is a little bit more dramatic than your fish soup one, but it's got the same.
Oh, absolutely.
The same.
John, a couple of more technical questions.
Yes.
There's a question about your guide to the Camino Portuguese.
Yes.
22/23. Is that the most up-to-date guide, or is there another one coming out?
There isn't one. There is the map book is being reprinted as we speak and will come out. Now, there aren't many changes, but there's a big change for those walking from Lisbon, and that is the Pope is coming to Lisbon, I don't know, next few months. And so there's a feverish activity to open up the lovely route out of Lisbon along the coast there and to take you off the road. And they're putting in these great big boardwalks so you can walk. The idea is to be able to walk all the way from the center of Lisbon all the way to Villafranca, all by the coast, all by away from cars and so on. So that's a big development. And then there are, other sort of smaller minor ones, but that's a big route change. Most of the changes are from the Lisbon to Porto section. The other Porto down, there's no major changes.
John, I don't want to embarrass you, but Monica has prompted a question. How good is your Spanish, John? So Monica's concerned because she doesn't speak a lot of Spanish.
Oh, I see. Oh, no problem.
I know that John Brierley's been walking the Camino routes for years.
I've written, I've researched, I've done all my work for over 25 years. I mean, the books weren't printed until 20 years ago, but all with my rudimentary Spanish. Now, I run into some very interesting mistranslations, which has caused a lot of merriment over the years. But it's lovely to, when I'm in any foreign country, I'll always make an effort to at least start a conversation off with minimal, buenos dias, something to indicate that, I'm a guest in your country and so on. And it's very easy to pick up a few phrases and have those in your hip pocket. And most of the stuff that I'm talking about, how many beds have you got? What prices are they? Is there a seasonal difference? Those, I don't need a big language to get the data that I need, and neither does a pilgrim walking at it. And I've never had a problem with it. Even in the smaller villages, people understand sign language, are you full? Have you got accommodation? Is there something to eat? I don't think it's a problem.
Wonderful. John, as we're coming near the end, would you like to wrap up and tell us, just summarize your life on the Camino? 25 years in the next 5 minutes.
Well, it's a bit that nobody's asked those questions, because I love the sort of the energy that often comes from a question being posed or a comment being made and then a response to that. But if nothing there is coming up, I would say to you, and it's in a way, it's where my biggest focus now is in what I do. And that's really to try and for myself and for anyone else, to see the Camino, I mentioned it earlier, as a way of life, a way of living. There's that lovely quote from, I think it might be Rumi, or, my life is my temple and my religion. If you want to know what my religion is, if you want to know, look at the way I live my life. So bringing the Camino home, there's no point in going on to the Camino just for the experience of the 3 or 4 weeks or 6 or wherever you start or whatever you do, to arrive in Santiago and then drop it all and come home and go back to the old way of being. The Camino is a way to shift consciousness of the planet, and we need to do it urgently. The consciousness of the planet is stuck in a very old and dangerous mode, and we need to shift out of it. We need to shift out of it fast. We need to shift out of the fear and into love. And the only way we can do that is to bring back the lessons that we've learned along the Camino, the open mind that you mentioned, Johnny, the open heart, and to bring that back home with us, and to see our life becoming a Camino. That is, a way of self-discovery, a way of generating more love in the world, of meeting everybody in every situation with a loving kindness. Now, we often get it wrong, but if that's our intentionality, then we become a pilgrim for life. And that's really the key ingredient, for me, is to see that the Camino is a way of transforming our life and turning it into a way of living more wholesomely, in a more unified, loving, caring way, because that's where we need to go fast.
Two questions. Maybe there's something other questions coming up. Two questions. One is a question which comes up in the forums and Facebook very regularly, totally understandable. Female pilgrims walking on their own, are there security considerations? And how should we compare? And, you know, I'm sure you would agree, John, we shouldn't treat the Camino any differently from anything else in life. Don't leave your camera in your wallet or your purse down in the albergue. And for females, and for all of us, the Spanish authorities have issued a wonderful application for smartphones called Alert Cops. Now, I downloaded this 3 years ago. I ended up using it, where you register, you give them your details, you upload a photograph, and I walked past an accident while I was walking the Camino, and I immediately pressed the button for Alert Cops. They texted me in English. I explained to them in English what was going on, and then I kept on walking because there were people dealing with it. And about an hour later, a police car drew up, and he said to me, "You're John. We've dealt with that report." So they knew who I was, and they found me because of the GPS functions. Now, Joe has asked a really interesting question. She's walking, or they're walking a section of the Camino with a group of students in June. I usually walk alone, they say, but I'm walking with this group of students. Any special recommendations or things I should be mindful of? What do you think, John? I would give them a guidebook or photocopy the guidebook and send them out on their own in the morning and meet them at the end of the day.
Oh God, the mind boggles. The group, God bless you for bringing them out, and that's a wonderful thing, a wonderful gift for them, I'm sure. I mean, it's a difficult thing I don't really know about. My experience isn't about groups and guiding groups or being part of groups. I write in a sense for an individual. So I've no, and I'm not good. I don't have good children's psychology, although my wife's a child psychologist, and so too are my daughters. I'm sure they would be able to respond to that, but I don't think I'm really in a position to offer any really much helpful advice. Just keep a careful eye on them. Make sure they don't wander too far off. I mean, I think if we're on the regular routes, the more common routes like the FRANCÉS, if that's the one you're talking about, the safety issue, there's just so many people on the route. It's really difficult. The world isn't a safe place. But having said that, there is, my two daughters have walked the route on their own. I think they would say to me that they've never felt safer than walking the Camino de Santiago. They always feel there's people around. You've got the Camino family developing. You've got a sense of respect, both from pilgrims and from inn owners and hospitalarians and so on. So I think that I don't think there's anything to worry about. Enjoy the experience.
We should stop about now. May I thank everybody for being here, and may I seriously invite you, if as you're preparing for your Camino, questions occur to you, email me. We'll get you an answer. And there are no stupid questions. If you've got a question, ask the question. And I want to thank Sean for handling the technical things. And I didn't throw anybody out by accident because Sean was looking after it. In particular, I want to thank my friend, John Brierley. John, thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for the thought you put into all of this, and for the guidebooks which have made the Camino accessible for very many people. Now, I want to thoroughly embarrass John because he's a highly successful and well-published author. But let me tell everybody, as I go around the Camino routes and I visit an albergue and they say to me, we had a hole in the roof, but John Brierley called in one day and now the roof is repaired. John is generous with the money he makes as a professional guidebook writer. So John, thank you for everything. And thank you, everybody. We'll stop now. Right, Sean, you can close us down as you wish. Thank you very much, everyone.
Right. Be blessed.